You're listening to the Fed and Fearless podcast. On today's episode, I'm chatting with registered dietitian Bob Gassman about how to become resilient to stress through food and faith in God. So stay tuned. Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm your host, Laura Schoenfeld, a registered dietitian, nutrition business coach, and online entrepreneur with over 10 years of experience in online business. And I'm here to show you everything I've learned about creating a life and a business that nourishes you. On this podcast, we'll talk about the lifestyle habits, practical strategies, mindset shifts, and leaps of faith required to build a healthy body, a powerful mind, a strong spirit, and a successful business. Hello, and welcome back to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm your host, Laura Schoenfeld, and our conversation today is a bit of a throwback to what the original purpose of this podcast was, and that is discussing the intersection of food, health, and faith. And my guest today is someone who's got a very interesting background. I met our guest through my online program, the Nutrition Business Accelerator. He's one of our few male clients in the program, which we always get excited when we have a man coming into the MBA program. As many of you probably know, the vast majority of dietitians are women. So whenever we get a man in the program, it's like, yes, there are men out there that do dietetics and nutrition and want to have nutrition businesses. So we definitely remembered Bob, if nothing else, just for the fact that he was one of our few male clients, but also something that stood out to us was the fact that not only is he a registered dietitian, but he's also a minister, which is definitely one of a kind as far as our students are concerned. So I'm super excited to get to chat with him today. I think you guys are going to enjoy this conversation, especially if you're somebody who has a relationship with God or a belief in God, or if you consider yourself a Christian. There's a lot of conversation that we have that is definitely very faith forward in this interview today. So for those of you that like to have those kind of conversations, I think you're going to enjoy this a lot. So my guest today is Bob Gassman. He's a registered dietitian nutritionist, a minister, and an author. He integrates his diverse background with a passion to connect people directly to God. Bob is also the founder and president of The Good Place Incorporated, a nonprofit ministry. Bob and his wife, Kim, have been married for more than 40 years and live in Tucson, Arizona. So, like I said, was super pumped to talk to Bob today, and we have a very interesting conversation about faith and about how a lot of people who consider themselves people of faith can struggle with their health, struggle with their food choices, and struggle with stress. And that's not how we're designed to live. So we hope that our conversation today will inspire you to do what you can do to get to a place where stress isn't causing health problems for you anymore, and to really rely on God's guidance to lead you towards the things that'll do that most effectively. So without further ado, here is Bob Gassman. All right, everybody. Well, I'm so excited to have with us on the Fed and Fearless podcast today, Bob Gassman. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. So glad to be with you, Laura.
And Bob was just telling me before we hit record that he actually found me by stumbling upon this podcast. So I was stoked to hear that because podcasting can be a lot of work, and our goal is always to connect with the right people. So I was excited to hear that it had an effect, and we got Bob into our MBA program, which was so nice to have him there. So Bob, I would love to hear your story because you have definitely one of the more interesting bios of the students we've worked with. You are a registered dietitian, a minister, and an author. So I don't think we've ever had a minister dietitian before. I would love to hear your story about how you actually became both of those things and what led you to become a dietitian and a minister.
Okay. Well, I think I was the minister first from my younger days, but I also had gone to the Culinary Institute of America and learned how to cook. And then I got my bachelor's in hotel restaurant and so on. And then I got into ministry and when I was around your age, believe it or not, I decided to go back to get an RD. So I went for it and I got through the program. And then I set up a private practice in a medical building with doctors were referring everybody. So that's the way things were rolling. And people wanted to see me like every 2 to 3 weeks. And that's where I discovered that, and you're fully aware of different nutrition protocols to help people with stress. When I interviewed people, they said they're under stress. About 90% of them felt stress was causing their disease or their issues. So one day I just kind of said, well, I wonder what God thinks about stress. And so I sat down with a concordance and I started looking at the word distress because stress wasn't around back then. And I came to find a pattern that anybody that called out to God for help, he would deliver them from stress. And so I thought, well, maybe I should write a book about this. And that's what led me to be an author. But one of the turning points and the reason I closed down my practice eventually was I decided to go to India by an invitation. And I saw what the scriptures said could happen actually happen. And people came up to me and they brought babies or deaf people or blind people even. And they expected healing and their faith to be healed was amazing. And they got results. And I thought, I can't just go back to being a dietitian in an office. I have to expand this whole thing. So that's when a turning point happened. And I've gotten to travel around the world since then and be in different cultures and different communities teaching about going to God for stress. But the cool thing is you can incorporate as an adjunct therapy, if I may call it that, food and nutrition. It's not to say it's one or the other, but to incorporate both of them. And I thought about your guest one time, Jendaye, I think that's how you pronounce it. And she kind of has that thing too. So that's the track I've been on for 2 decades now. And you kind of helped me bring back part of the nutrition because I want to incorporate both of those to, like you do, to help people get better results.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. And I feel like not all of our listeners are Christians or people of faith, but we have a lot of them. And I will say that I had a similar experience when I was, right before I went all in on the business coaching. I was doing a lot of work with people who had health issues, but were also Christian and maybe we're overemphasizing the food and exercise piece. And we're so just myopic about, I have to get the right diet. I have to get the right exercise plan. I have to do everything right with my supplements, all of that. And they were totally compartmentalizing their physical health from their spiritual health. And so that was something I was always really passionate about. And actually, that's how this Fed and Fearless podcast came to be. It was really initiated by that, seeing that, nutrition makes a difference. And if you're not getting the nutrients your body needs to function, as much as faith can overcome disease, it's like, well, let's at least set you up with a good baseline, right? But I do find that there's a large tendency, especially in our country, and I'm sure, being an international traveler, you've probably seen this too. There's a large tendency in this country for people to micromanage their diet and their exercise routine and everything and make that so much of their focus on a day-to-day basis as opposed to, doing what's necessary and the baseline of, making sure you're feeding yourself as best as possible, but not looking at it as, this is going to be the thing that makes my life so much better. And, spending all their free time thinking about it, learning about it, trying new things, that kind of thing. And you had mentioned traveling to India. I'm guessing, and I've never been to India, but I would not be surprised if they don't think about food and nutrition and exercise as much as we do in this country. Is that right?
Well, the interesting thing is the cities have been bombarded by advertising, and they eat differently than the people in the country. And then they have higher incidences of nutritionally related diseases. But you're right, a lot of people in the country, I mean, just to get something to eat is amazing to them. So there's a whole different kind of cultures there. But, back to your point, I was thinking 100 years ago, we didn't even know what vitamins were. And the human race has survived all these years. How do we do it? So there's something innate within us to choose, but we've really gotten confused and our judgment clouded. I mean, even believers now, because like you said, running all over the place to get the right things. And I think that the Spirit of God is the nutritionist within the believer, the Christian, to help guide them. I mean, and it's supposed to be a guide to life. I mean, this wisdom, and why aren't we taking advantage of it? Or are we being shuffled away from it through the newest diet or the newest trend and fad? And first of all, I look at you as a minister too, because the word minister just means servant, and you're serving people, and you're equipping people who are interested with not just the nutrition, but the business and the faith to help other people. And so I think, that's a great calling too. See what I mean? It's special. And I know there's others out there and others that you are associated with that can serve the body of Christ that way too. And it's just bringing our gifts and our talents and helping people focus on God as a heavenly Father, just like a parent watches. Like, if someone goes and sits and says, I'm confused about what to eat, can you help me? God will help. And it doesn't even have to be a Christian. I mean, he's so loving, he'll call out to anybody. And then you look for that person to help. Just like I was looking for something, and, I pick up a podcast, which I hardly ever do, by the way. There's, thousands of them out there, right? But I wound up with you on the treadmill, and I said, oh, this is great. So I think there's a providence with God, and anybody who, and I tracked this and documented it scripturally, that anybody who calls out and says, I need help, God will work to help that individual. So where the faith comes in is looking for somebody to come into your life to help you.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like so many people think, oh, the only way God's going to help me is if he just snaps his fingers and everything is fixed. And I think a lot of people forget that just being connected with the right people that have the knowledge and skills to help with whatever you're needing help with is another way that, if it may even be a much more common way, that God might actually answer prayer for support in any area of your life. So I think that's cool because, again, people either think, obviously there's a lot of people that don't believe in God or don't really, they're like, oh yeah, I think God exists, but I don't, talk to him or anything. And I think there's, they're missing out on a lot of opportunity to have that guidance outside of themselves, to not have to try to figure out everything on their own or have to be, so well educated that they know exactly what they need to do, because obviously God knows everything, right? So if you are looking for something, he knows what it is, and he is the one that can help connect you with it. So that's really cool. Something you had mentioned a few minutes ago that actually perked my attention and makes a lot of sense to me is that you said that there was no word stress in the Bible, which is really interesting. Which I know the word stress, actually, I think it was like Hans Sale. I forget how to say his last name, but that word was only invented in the last couple of 100 years or something. So obviously the Bible was written thousands of years ago. And not that they weren't experiencing hardship, but that was interesting to me that word, like that idea of being just stressed all the time, doesn't seem like that was necessarily how people were operating their day-to-day life the way we do, at least.
Okay, so let me just elaborate on that point. The word stress came to be in the 14th century. They chopped off the dis and it morphed into stress. So and stress and distress are the same thing, really. And a synonym that's used in the scriptures is trouble. Like I'm troubled, or I have a troubled heart. So when I did my research for the book, what I saw was anybody with whatever the stress was. And I chronicled different people. like David and different kings like Asaph. There was a worship guy that worked in the temple. Even Jesus had stress. And what emerged as the pattern and the exhortation was anybody who has stress, go to God and he will help you. He'll deliver you, which means rescue you from whatever your stress is. And you're right. I don't know what you eat. I don't know what you think. I don't know what's stressing you today or me. You don't know with me. Like some people, like you said, maybe get stressed going on a podcast. The whole thing is, it's kind of like the gauge on your car that says your oil is low. The red light comes on. If you cut the wires to that and ignore it, your engine's going to burn up. Or a smoke alarm, if you ignore that. And so what I found was that stress, I'm going to call it stress, you can call it distress or troubled, it's an alarm. It's a signal, just like we have body signals. It's a signal to run to God. Whatever that looks like to you, whether you say, well, I just believe a little bit, or maybe God's out there. That was the cool thing that I learned is whoever runs to him or calls out to him and says, help, he will come and deliver them, but he knows how to help them. He knows who to bring into their life. And, just like the MBA program can be a catalyst to shift the events of life all of a sudden. Well, God orchestrated that, you see. And it could be one statement made or one podcast you do. And we don't know where things are going out there, but God, like you said, knows that stuff. So we can be confident that even if we're reaching one person, it can be saving their life. And if it saves their life and they have children, now it's saving the next generation. So it's really cool to stay tapped into him is my point, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And with the stress piece, I feel like, at least in our current society, we normalize it, right? It's like, oh, that's just how you have to live your life. And everybody's stressed. And, if you're not stressed, you're not doing it right, that kind of mentality. And obviously, as you discovered, as you were studying the scriptures more in depth, that isn't actually how we're supposed to be living. And that's not God's design for human life to be stressed all the time.
No, it's an indicator light, so to speak. Now God is, and again, I know there's things out there like mindful or intuitive type of eating, and that's good. But if it gets shifted again onto God, then he can give you the wisdom of what to eat. So if, like, my wife is a teacher and she gets up at 4:30. So I get up with her and I make her breakfast and I pack her lunch and all that. Now she encounters stressful situations at school all day. So I take the foods that God designed to fuel the body, help make the body resistant to stress and the mind, because there's things that work with the body and the mind together, right? To help her get through the day and be more resilient and stay healthy and, help her immune system. All these things work together. But if you think about it, God's the one who produced whole foods, if I may. And I'm not like harping on just plant-based diet or something, but just look at all the foods that he's used as vehicles that taste good, but also carry the vitamins and the minerals and the amino acids and the essential nutrients to fuel our bodies, like you said. So if we, and it doesn't have to be this religious ritual thing. If we just in our heart acknowledge him, like, wow, yeah, I understand the farmer grew this, but God provided the rain and the soil and the sunshine. And so all these things are coming into us and helping us and can really bring our hearts to God as the one who sustains us, not just created us, but sustains us. So doesn't he know? I mean, according to like Psalm 139, he created us in the womb. He knew of us in our womb when we were being formed. He helped fashion us. So he knows everything about us in our life. And so he wants to be involved with us. And I think if we just put him in that proper place and enjoy food, but have it a secondary thing, a gift from God, but God is the greatest thing. And if we can turn our hearts to him that way, then we will be sensitive to him nudging us. Like I told you, yes, you said, hey, if you do podcasts, watch the coffee intake beforehand. That's what you said, right? On one of your lessons. But let's say God might be nudging me about that. Like, you're drinking too much coffee. Well, that might not be the issue with you, or, it works with sugar or alcohol or some of these other things. If we're tapped into God, let him direct our path. And he's quite capable and willing to help us in those areas.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned some of that stuff, especially I think you might know this. It's something that my podcast listeners definitely know at this point, that I'm pregnant, and it's something that maybe Bob didn't know.
Congratulations.
Based on his face reaction, you guys couldn't see that, but so it is really interesting, because even with the knowledge that I have about nutrition, I mean, I have, about a decade of education on it and training in it. And it's really interesting being pregnant and realizing like all this miraculous stuff is happening inside of my body right now that I have some influence on. I'm going to, do my best to take my prenatal vitamins and eat enough and get enough water and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like that stuff's going and it's happening. And it literally is like, I'm not, consciously saying, now I'm making the baby's skeleton and now I'm, like that kind of thing. So it is really interesting to kind of have that moment of realization that, like we have some influence. And of course, I always want to do my best to make those choices that are optimal. But at the end of the day, it's like, we're not really in control. And if we're trying to be micromanaging things or vice versa, if we think, oh, it doesn't matter how I treat my body, or, I can't figure this stuff out, or I can't cut coffee, or I can't cut sugar, even though I feel that like nudge that I should be doing that. It's, I see a lot of people getting stuck in that mindset of either I can't do it or I have to do it all myself. And it's really interesting how I feel like when you're following God's leading in your life, it's like, it's a combination of, I can't do it myself, but I have a lot of resources to actually make changes in my life that would be best for me. So being pregnant's been interesting, because it's like you realize how little control you have, but then also you realize like, hey, there's still stuff I can do. And, God will lead me to the right things in this period of my life to make sure that I'm not, putting my baby's health at risk or my own health at risk.
Yeah. And I think when he gives us wisdom, he gives us the grace to go with it to help. Like, he'll say, okay, I want you to cut the coffee in half, and why don't you drink a glass of water in between, type of thing, just to dilute the concentration of the caffeine or something. So it's like I mentioned earlier, he, to look at him as a heavenly father, gentle, kind, all that, leading us to change. He says he'll do it with gentleness and goodness. So I think it's really great to sit down with them, so to speak, and just say, okay, is there anything I need to know about this nutrition, or anything I need to know about the coffee? Should I cut it out? Should I, what should I do here? And God says if anybody asks him for wisdom, he'll give it to them, and he won't beat them upside the head for asking. But ask in faith, ask believing that he's going to respond. And I think that's a great key is, just like we're talking, sit with him, pour out your heart, say, is there something I should do? And then look for the answers, because they'll come. That's what he promises. And I just think it's an added dimension that we can take advantage of. We can go through life without it. We can try to eat all organic and healthy and this and that, but we can also acknowledge him and, what to do, because, traveling to India or traveling to Mexico or Nepal or Africa, there's food associated with culture and hospitality. And some of the things that were set before me, could scare you. But I didn't want to be offensive either. I don't eat that kind of stuff, because that's the way they express their love, is with food. So food is definitely connected to God. And I think, even though we didn't, nutrition is a younger science, I think it's been around for a long time. And God worked with people to teach them how to grow things and catch things and raise things. And we forget about that sometimes in our busy schedule. So my message is, well, just continue to keep him involved, and he'll promise, good results for you.
Yeah. It's funny. What you said a few minutes ago reminds me of a podcast I heard from I don't actually know if he's a pastor. I know he was trained in a seminary, but he actually worked for the CIA and those kind of organizations. His name is Jamie Winship. I don't know if you've heard of him before, but his whole ministry is around conflict resolution and helping people get more clear on their identity, because a lot of conflict comes from people not having their identity rooted in the right things. And I remember one of the things he said as far as prayer is concerned, that he believes the most effective thing to be praying for your own self, not necessarily for other people, is the question, what do you want me to know? And what do you want me to do? So it's really funny because that's like exactly what you said a few minutes ago with the whole taking care of your health and your nutrition and, doing the things you need to do to be more stress resilient. It's asking those two questions, right? It's what do you want me to know? Like, what do I need to know about my circumstances? What do I need to know about what's going on or what you want from me in this circumstance? And then what do I need to do? So there's some level of action associated with, maybe you do need to cut caffeine or get more sleep or drink more water, that kind of stuff. And so I think that's really interesting that you said it like that, because it literally reminded me immediately of this podcast I just listened to in the last month or so about a totally different conversation. He's out doing conflict resolution in like Syria and stuff like that, but it's just really interesting to see how those questions could apply to almost pretty much anything, literally anything, any problem or challenge that you're facing in your life. Those questions could be used.
Yeah, exactly. And that you bring up identification, and I'm working on this now for another book, is that the born-again believer who confesses Jesus as Lord has him come in, through the Holy Spirit and live. And the book of Romans that Paul wrote says that we died with him and we're risen with him and we're new creations now. So we have a new life and old things have passed away. And it talks about lusts and uncontrollable things that existed in this old nature that gets crucified. We are to identify with the risen Christ. And it's a spiritual truth, but we have to think it through in our minds to act it out, that, I'm no longer associated with the old nature. I'm not the same guy who existed before I got born again. And to put that stuff away, because the person that doesn't have spirit in them, just body and soul, they're subject to whatever the lusts of the flesh are, basically. And I don't want to get preachy here, but just there's a power that's available to the believer. And I look around in a non-judgmental way, but just to observe, and I don't see a big difference between that population and unbelievers. And I think it's an identity crisis. I think identity has been stolen. And we think, well, I'll just do what I want, eat what I want, drink what I want, do it when I want. And that's the old nature. And we think we're in control of that. But if we present ourselves to God, is what it says, say, I'm yours, then that invites him to help us in everything and take us from where we were to where he wants us to be. He's already working that in the baby in your womb. Speaking of things going on, I think that's so cool. Congratulations.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Well, and, I think that kind of goes back to what we were saying before about even people who are believers tending to compartmentalize their physical way of being, right? So the foods they're eating, the way that they're living their life, it's like they're not applying their spiritual beliefs to those areas. They're just like, oh, I'm, I have to eat sugar. I can't control myself around it. And again, I'm not saying sugar's bad. I eat sugar lately I've been having ice cream most nights because it's like, I need calories. That's the easiest way to get calories. So I'm not like demonizing sugar for, just across the board, but there are a lot of people, like I know I have in-laws who, we've had these conversations before where they feel like they really struggle. Like I know for Christmas, my husband's family does a lot of candy and chocolate and stuff in stockings. Like I'll get this stocking that's like literally like bursting at the seams with chocolate. And, if I even eat it all myself, because honestly, most of the time I just like give half of it to my husband. I'm like, I don't need all of this. And I don't even want it because it's like a lot of sugar. But I mentioned when I was at their house last Christmas that the amount of chocolate in that stocking would probably take me like a year to get through. And my in-laws were like, oh my gosh, it takes us like a month. Like as soon as we start eating it, it's just like, we can't stop. And it's just interesting because then we were having this conversation about, how they were speaking over themselves and how they were saying, oh, I can't control myself and I don't have any willpower and all that stuff. And it's just really interesting because they're very faithful Christians, like in every other area of their life. And it's just, it's hard to see when people you care about, people that you want to see healthy and everything, when they kind of have that, oh, the nutrition thing is that's just who I am and that's just how it is. And I can't do anything differently there. And I think when we look at, what God's able to do and how he's able to guide us and the fact that we are new, we can be new, like we're meant to be new, we're meant to be renewing ourselves every day. It's to just kind of have that like defeatist mentality around the food piece, I just don't think is, it's not accurate. And again, like you said before, it's not meant to be judgmental. It's more just pointing out, like, if you're able to change in so many other areas of your life, why is this something that wouldn't be able to change, right? Like, why is this the one area that God can't do anything about? It's like, I don't think God is afraid of, a bag of sugar, right? It's like, not like it's, oh, I can help you with any other issue in your life, but not your candy addiction, right? It's, and I'm being a little facetious, but I feel like that sometimes is the mindset people have, that it's like, oh, well, that's just how I am and I can't change that area of my life. Have you seen that before?
Yeah. And it brings up another interesting point, that we are not to be ignorant of the devil's devices. And, what stress was during biblical times, by the way, were so much more intense than what we call stress. Like I wrote in the book about a teenage girl who said, I'm so stressed, my boyfriend hasn't called me in the last 5 minutes. So that's how they called stress. But I mean, if you read about David, his men that he trained were going to kill him. That's stress to me. I'm like, oh, wow, you're going to kill me? Jesus didn't want to go to the cross. He got stressed out about it. Really? I have to drink from this cup. And so, I mean, there was some real intense stress. And so I think we've diluted the intensity of it, but we don't have to wait till stress gets intense to go to God. If we feel something that we think is stressful, a traffic jam, a bad conversation, we can take everything to him and get help. And I think there's a validity to what you said about something like sugar addiction. And why is it showing up in all these foods? And why have we gone from X number of pounds a year to 5 times that amount now? And why is it being put in baby food? And, when you study the politics behind it, it gets very interesting. But what if the devil, I'm just being hypothetical, I mean, not that he's hypothetical, but what if he wanted to cause the believer, older age, when they have time to help others more, they're probably financially secure, they've got kids, grandkids, let's say, and they're running off to the doctor's office every other day to be treated for preventable diseases. And I'm talking about people in the church. Why did that have to happen? Or why does it? Because elderly people are full of wisdom and they have something they can give to the other, next generation, or teaching their kids or grandkids, just helping, or they want to bend over and pick up their grandkid and they can't. Why is that happening to believers? And is it something the devil is throwing in to inhibit and just make us in the prime of life, let's say, spend our time in a waiting room and being filled with medication to treat symptoms of like I said, something that could have been treated better. And if you, again, not to judge, but if you look at the coffee hour or the fellowship hall, whatever, and what is served in those arenas, what are we serving that? And I belonged to a pastor association, and I offered, because of some obese pastors, I'll sit with you for free just to help you. They weren't interested. So I think the world's view of all this has infiltrated the church, and it ought to be reversed. Someone has to start. I mean, I think Agenja Dei probably is doing that, and I should hook up with her someday. But if we're not going to confront it, then it's going to continue to happen. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, definitely. And I remember my mom's a dietitian too, if you're not familiar, but she used to be really bothered by the meals that would get served at their church events, because it was like trays of cookies from Costco and that kind of stuff. And again, it's not having cookies. I have cookies, right? It's not like I'm saying you can't do it, but just the volume of processed foods, and people are eating so much of it, and they're struggling with their health and, significantly overweight and all of this. And it's not, again, not meant to be judgmental. It's more just looking at, like, is this the best that God has for us to have all of these health issues and maybe a shorter lifespan because of, dealing with chronic health issues. And I just feel like it's, for whatever reason, it just seems like a conversation that people aren't necessarily having in the big, the bigger world of, the Christian church. And I don't know, it's very interesting. Like, even our church serves like donuts and stuff at services, and we'll see these kids running around with like a coffee cup full of donuts. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have like this. I'm a little bit of a control freak, so we'll see what motherhood does to me. But I'm like, oh my gosh, if I saw my kid running around with like a bucket of donuts that they're going to eat, it's like, ooh, is that really how we want to be teaching kids how to interact with food? Like, oh, you just got to like shove it in your pockets and stuff and act like you're a chipmunk or something, try to get as much donuts into your mouth as possible. And so I don't know, it's interesting because it's like, on one hand, I think there's a tendency to definitely overemphasize food and fitness. And I worked with a lot of women who were Christian that had disordered eating habits. And so we're not recommending people go in that direction. But to me, it seems like there is this really big split between either you're totally obsessed with food because you think, oh, I have to be perfect and I have to like do everything right. And that kind of perfectionist mindset that I think is really common for a lot of Christians, especially Christian women. Or it's at the other end of the spectrum where it's like, oh, nutrition doesn't matter. God can heal me if I have a problem and I'm not going to worry about what I'm eating. So I don't know if you've noticed that, but that does tend to be what I see. It's kind of this like both ends of the spectrum, which neither are healthy, neither the eating disorder type of behavior or it doesn't matter what I eat. I'm just going to like not worry about it, not think about it, not, do anything differently. And I feel like finding that middle ground of caring for your body, because, obviously our bodies are physical beings. Like, we can't just like trash them and think they're going to function the way that they're designed to function, but also not making it this like religion where you're obsessed with your body, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I've always listened to during the NBA what you were talking about to keep that balance. And, because you understand biochemistry, that little kid with the cup of donuts is associating through his pleasure center, God equals pleasure through donuts. And I know that sounds weird, but it builds a memory bank of, oh yeah, I remember the good times and that's sometimes hard to shake, I think. And there's plenty of people that are attending church that would love to cut up fresh fruit or do a vegetable tray or make hummus or something, I mean, maybe not in exchange of the other things, but have that option. And I've done that with churches, and it's turned it around. And it gives people the opportunity to get involved. So, and I love what you said about the body, because it's not like if you're born again, your body is insignificant. It carries the Holy Spirit. So why not make it last long and enjoy it and feel good? Because, I know you've had functional medicine training, and years ago I went that route too for a while, with Jeffrey Bland, if you know him. And, he talked about the walking wounded. You don't feel bad enough to lay down, but you're always feeling lethargic and don't have the energy to do what you want. And I think that, yes, it's happened to the world, but it's also infiltrated the church. And we're not supposed to be like that. I mean, it's part of our deliverance and wholeness is to, and I even, like what I'm working on in the book now, I see eating the foods that God provided as a form of worship. I know that sounds wild, but think about the processed foods out there. And you're right, eat them when you want or here and there. I mean, with guidance, it's not like all the time, but what happened to the foods he provided? Because processed foods removing all those minerals and vitamins and so on, components, antioxidants that were designed to run on. It's like sticking something inferior into a gas tank and expecting it to do high performance. And I share in that with you that, it's not like we're judgmental, but we're concerned about loved ones. Because, when I started ministering at 25, people were smoking like crazy and, excessive eating of this and that. It was kind of coming out of the hippie era of fast foods. And people said that when they were 25, my friends said, I'll live, healthy. I'll just believe God, if any. And a lot of those people I know are dead, or they have diabetes, or they have heart disease, and they're crippled, or kidney disease. And did they not believe God? I think they tried, but the five senses symptoms were overwhelming. And it's not like God was judgmental and said, well, you didn't listen to me. No, I don't believe in that either. But, God looks at our hearts, and I just think it's time to not like radically go the other way, but sit with God and say, what's going on here? And can personally start with ourselves and say, is there something you want me to do to improve? Because it's not like I think coffee's bad, but if I'm drinking too much of it, or if I'm becoming addicted to it, or, alcohol, if I'm shutting down ministry to people because I want to go drink because it's pulling on me, then I have to sit with God and say, we got an issue here. Can you help me? Because I want to be better for you. I think that's wisdom too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like being able to separate that from the belief that your value is attached to whether or not you do those things, like that, I think is one of the hardest things for people, because I feel like it's, they're worried, oh, if I start to examine myself too much, then that means I'm getting down on myself and I'm being, what's the word? I guess it's just that idea of shaming yourself, right? And they think, oh, if I think about it too much, I'm going to get into the shame spiral and I don't want to feel ashamed. So they'll avoid it. And it's like, and I think this goes for so many different areas of life. I mean, I know we know each other through the MBA program. I think a lot of times running a business, you have to make hard decisions. You have to examine your choices, your beliefs, all of that. And so I would love to see more people get into this place where they can examine their life with God's guidance and not make it this, oh, I'm a bad person because I do this, but more, how is this behavior or this choice that I'm making serving me and the life that God created me for? And I feel like you can do that in a way that does not require any sort of negative self-talk or getting down on yourself or beating yourself up. It's totally possible to do that in a way that's very empowering and very just full of faith in God to lead you towards the next step for your life. So my hope is that, all the conversations we have on this show, I always hope people are walking away feeling empowered and feeling like there can be something better for me, and it doesn't have to be rooted in shame or feeling like I'm not good enough if I don't do it. And that's what I hear you saying is it doesn't have to be shame-based. It can be very much faith and confidence-based to make these changes.
Yeah. And it's putting confidence in God, who does not give you guilt or shame. That's not how he works. And if that's coming, that's not God. And that's a good way to know it's not him. It's something else. And because his guidance is easy to be entreated, it's peaceable and it's doable. And, if I don't go to the treadmill today and lift weights, I'm going to condemn myself. We're already done with all the condemnation. We're already judged in Christ, and we came out identified with him. And I think the older we get, the more we start to realize eternal life's a lot longer than this life. And, to live our lives in that hope, and it's not to disregard our bodies, but it's to say, wow, well, I want to do the best I can because I'm going to be rewarded eternally for the right decisions of walking with God. So I want to be humble and meek, and I want to seek his guidance. And that's not going to bring shame or guilt at all. That brings praise from God. Like, well done. I'm glad you're here. Let's talk. That's why I named, the ministry in the book, The God Place. It actually means taking your heart and your mind and sitting with God and saying, here I am. Can we have a talk? And that invites him in a way that communicates with you. Do you have sisters or brothers?
Both.
You have both. So your mom, I know you talk highly of your mom. I bet she dealt differently with each one of you growing up. And probably even you had different eating habits growing up. So what about our Heavenly Father? Can't he deal with us where we're at, and individually and kindly and lovingly? And the answer to all those is yes. And we can just experiment, just go on a journey and try it out and see how it's working.
Yeah. I love it. Well, Bob, I'm sure we could talk a lot longer about this topic, and it's been a pleasure having you on the show. For the listeners that want to connect with you and learn more about your work, whether it's your book or the work that you do with the ministry, where can they connect with you to hear more about your wise words of encouragement when it comes to physical and spiritual health?
Well, I mean, thanks to you, I'm working on different media platforms, but right now I have a Facebook page that's a business page developing, and that's called the godplace.facebook, www.facebook.thegodplace.org. And the other one, I have a web page set up, and not as many articles, but people are welcome to go to that. It's thegodplace.org. Or you can email me at bob@thegodplace.org. And I'm very happy to engage with anybody and see where it goes. So,
mm-hmm. And I forgot to ask you, what is the name of your book?
It's called The God Place.
Oh, easy.
I know. And that's what came out of my nutrition practice, is to help people connect to God to overcome stress. So, and that's, available on Amazon and so on. So
awesome. I love it. Well, we'll make sure all of those links are in the show notes for today's episode. So the main website would be thegodplace.org. And then it sounds like if you Google The God Place, you'll find the book, you'll find the Facebook page, but we'll make sure all those links are in the notes if you guys want to check them out. And Bob very graciously provided his email so that if you want to connect with him directly, that's available for you too. Well, thank you so much, Bob. It's been so awesome chatting with you today about an interesting topic for sure.
I know. I'm glad thanks for having me. I really appreciate it and everything you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks to all of you listeners for hanging out with us for the last 45 minutes or so, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week on the Fed and Fearless podcast. Take care, everybody. Are you a nutritionist or dietitian struggling to figure out how much to charge for your programs and services? Maybe you've heard that as a nutritionist, you should just charge what you're worth. But this way of thinking can cause you to either undercharge your clients or work yourself into the ground trying to earn your worth. As a healthcare provider, you can't set up a pricing structure that forces you to sacrifice your own health and well-being in the name of your business and your clients. But I promise it doesn't have to be this way. When you download my free profit planning workbook, I'll walk you step by step through the 10-step process for determining the right pricing for your nutrition business. As a nutritionist, you have the power to completely change someone's life for the better. There's huge value in that, so it's time to stop underselling what you do. By following along with this worksheet, you can determine exactly what you need to charge to achieve your revenue goals with ease. I'll teach you everything I've learned about pricing from growing my own nutrition business to over $250,000 in revenue annually and helping other dietitian and nutrition entrepreneurs hit their first $10,000 to $30,000 months and beyond. To get your free workbook, go to lauraschoenfeld.com/profit, PROFIT, and grab your copy today, so you no longer have to wonder how to set the right rates for your incredibly valuable nutrition services. That's lauraschoenfeld.com/profit. It's time to make the money that you deserve as a nutritionist, and I can't wait to help you get there.